Some secrets are not meant to hide love from you. They are meant to reveal how deeply you have always been loved. For 3 years, I believed my husband had only one habit he refused to explain. Every morning before leaving our home overlooking Lake Michigan, Ethan Brooks slipped an old silver key into the inside pocket of his navy blazer with the same quiet routine. It was not attached to his car keys. It was not part of the keychain for our house or his downtown office. It was older than anything else he owned, scratched along the edges and polished smooth by countless years of use. Whenever I asked about it, he smiled with that patient expression that had first made me fall in love with him and simply said, "One day." Then he would kiss my forehead, straighten his tie, and leave before I could ask another question. At first I thought it was charming. Everyone carried little mysteries into a marriage. I never imagined one small key could slowly become the loudest silence between us. On the night everything changed, an unexpected thunderstorm rolled across Chicago, rattling our bedroom windows just after midnight. I woke because Ethan was no longer beside me. The sheets on his side of the bed were cold, as though he had been gone for several minutes. Thinking he might be downstairs answering another late business call, I slipped on a sweater and quietly walked into the hallway. The house was almost completely dark except for a faint strip of warm light escaping from beneath the basement door. We rarely used the basement except for storage. Curious, I stepped closer without making a sound. I heard the soft click of metal against metal, followed by the unmistakable turning of a lock. My heart skipped. There had never been a locked room beneath our home. I slowly reached the bottom step just as Ethan disappeared through a narrow door, hidden behind shelves of old moving boxes. For the briefest moment I caught sight of the silver key between his fingers before he unlocked the door and slipped inside. The door closed gently behind him. I stood frozen in the dim light, listening. No voices, no television, no machinery, only complete silence. Nearly 15 minutes passed before the lock clicked again. Ethan stepped back into the basement carrying nothing at all. He carefully locked the hidden door once more, slid the silver key into his pocket, and turned toward the stairs. I barely managed to step behind the corner before he reached the hallway. He never saw me. Back upstairs he returned to bed, wrapping one arm around me as though nothing unusual had happened. His breathing slowed until he fell asleep within minutes, but sleep never returned for me. Every question I had ignored over the past 3 years suddenly came rushing back. Why had my husband built a hidden room beneath our own house without ever mentioning it? Why did only that old silver key open the door? Why visit it in the middle of the night? As the first light of dawn stretched across our bedroom ceiling, Ethan woke with his usual warm smile and wished me good morning exactly as he always did. He looked relaxed, peaceful, completely unchanged. But I was no longer looking at the same man I had trusted without question. Somewhere beneath our home waited a locked door, and somewhere behind that door was a truth that had already begun changing everything before I had even seen what it was hiding. The strange night refused to leave my thoughts, no matter how ordinary Ethan tried to make the next morning feel. He prepared breakfast exactly the way he always did, placing fresh berries beside my pancakes and pouring coffee into the blue ceramic mug he had given me on our first wedding anniversary. Every movement was calm and familiar, almost comforting, but I could not stop watching the inside pocket of his blazer where the old silver key rested. It was impossible to believe that something so small carried a secret large enough to create a hidden room beneath our own home. As he gathered his briefcase, he smiled at me across the kitchen island. "I might be home a little late tonight," he said. "The board wants to review the final numbers before next quarter." I nodded automatically, although my attention remained fixed on the faint outline of the key beneath the fabric. Before leaving, he kissed my forehead and whispered, "Thank you for always trusting me." The words stayed with me long after the front door closed behind him. Trust. It had always been the strongest part of our marriage. We had survived difficult years together, including failed business ventures before Ethan's company finally succeeded, and the disappointment of learning that starting a family would take longer than we had hoped. Through every challenge, we promised there would never be secrets between us. Yet somewhere beneath our feet was a locked door I had never known existed. After finishing my coffee, I tried to return to my painting, but every brushstroke ended the same way. Instead of flowers or landscapes, I found myself absent-mindedly sketching the shape of an old key over and over again. Frustrated, I set the brush aside and walked through the house, convincing myself I was only looking for inspiration. When I reached the basement door, my feet stopped without permission. The room looked exactly as it always had. Shelves lined with storage boxes, holiday decorations, old furniture, and framed artwork we had not displayed in years. Everything appeared ordinary, yet now I knew there was another door hidden somewhere behind those shelves. I carefully examined the wall where I had seen Ethan disappear the night before. There, tucked behind several neatly stacked moving boxes, was a narrow wooden door painted the same soft gray as the surrounding walls. Without knowing it, I had walked past it hundreds of times. I reached for the handle. Locked. I gently pushed anyway. Nothing moved. Kneeling beside the frame, I examined the lock itself. It looked old but exceptionally well maintained, as though someone cared for it regularly. There were no signs of damage, dust, or neglect. Ethan had clearly been using it for a long time. My phone vibrated suddenly, making me jump. It was Ethan. "Good morning again," he said cheerfully. "I forgot to ask. How is the new painting coming along?" I looked at the hidden door while forcing my voice to sound normal. "Slowly, but I think it is finally taking shape." He laughed softly. "Some of the best things take time." We talked for another minute before ending the call, but his final sentence echoed strangely in my mind. Some of the best things take time. Was he talking about my painting, or something else entirely? As I slipped my phone back into my pocket, my eyes fell on a tiny scratch beneath the keyhole. It looked fresh, almost as though someone had recently pressed another key into the lock. An unexpected thought crossed my mind. If another key existed somewhere, perhaps I did not have to wait for Ethan to tell me what was behind that mysterious door. The idea refused to leave me alone. All afternoon I tried convincing myself that every marriage deserved a little privacy, that Ethan had earned my trust long before either of us imagined living in a beautiful home overlooking Lake Michigan. Yet every time I passed the basement door, I felt the quiet weight of unanswered questions pulling me back. By evening I had made a decision I never believed I would make. If I could not open the hidden door, I could at least learn where the mysterious key had come from. The following morning Ethan followed his familiar routine with almost perfect precision. He left for the office at 8 o'clock, carrying his leather briefcase and offering the same warm smile that had become the safest place in my world. 20 minutes after his car disappeared down the street, I drove into downtown Chicago and stopped outside the small locksmith shop where we had duplicated our house keys shortly after moving into our home. The owner, an elderly man named Walter, recognized me immediately. We exchanged friendly conversation before I carefully slid a sketchbook across the counter. On one page I had drawn the silver key from memory, recreating every scratch and unusual notch as accurately as I could. Walter studied the drawing for nearly a minute before adjusting his glasses. "This is an uncommon design," he said thoughtfully. "Very old style. I have only seen something similar once or twice." My heartbeat quickened. Could someone make another key from this drawing? He slowly shook his head. "Not from a drawing. I would need the original key." Disappointed, I thanked him and turned toward the door. Just before I reached the sidewalk, Walter called after me. "Whoever owns that key values whatever it opens. Locks like this are usually chosen because they are difficult to duplicate." His words stayed with me during the drive home. Ethan had not simply hidden a room. He had deliberately chosen a lock that almost guaranteed no one else could enter. That realization made the mystery even heavier. Over the next several weeks, I began noticing details I had ignored before. On the first Saturday of every month, Ethan left the house around 9 in the morning carrying only the silver key and a small canvas bag. He always returned 4 or 5 hours later looking physically tired but emotionally peaceful. Sometimes there were faint traces of colorful paint on the cuff of his shirt. Other times I noticed sawdust clinging to the sleeves of his jacket or tiny flecks of dried plaster near his shoes. None of those things belonged in a corporate boardroom. When I casually asked how the office renovation was going, He smiled and answered, "Almost finished." The explanation sounded reasonable, yet something inside me quietly resisted believing it. One bright Saturday, I stood at the front window watching his car pull away, and before I had time to reconsider, I grabbed my purse and followed him. I stayed several vehicles behind as he drove through downtown Chicago, crossed the river, and continued toward an older industrial district I had never visited before. Instead of entering an office building, Ethan parked beside an aging brick warehouse surrounded by tall chain-link fencing. He stepped out carrying the familiar canvas bag, looked briefly around the quiet street, unlocked a weathered metal side entrance with the old silver key, and disappeared inside. The heavy door closed behind him with a quiet echo that reached all the way to where I sat hidden inside my car. I stared at the silent building, realizing the hidden basement door was only the beginning of a much larger secret. My hands trembled as I stepped out of the car and looked across the quiet street toward the old brick warehouse. The neighborhood was almost forgotten by the city, filled with aging factories that had long since stopped producing anything. Rust colored the metal fences, ivy climbed the walls, and faded loading docks stood empty beneath the bright autumn sun. Nothing about the place matched Ethan's polished world of executive meetings, luxury offices, and charity galas. Yet this was where he came every month, carrying the old silver key that had quietly reshaped everything I believed about our marriage. I waited nearly 20 minutes before gathering enough courage to leave the driver's seat. Keeping a careful distance, I crossed the sidewalk and walked slowly around the side of the building. Most of the windows had been covered from the inside, but one narrow window near the rear loading entrance remained uncovered. I carefully stepped closer and looked inside. What I saw only deepened the mystery. The enormous warehouse had been transformed into something completely unexpected. Fresh white walls divided the open space into several rooms. Wooden tables stood neatly arranged beneath bright lights. Shelves filled with art supplies lined one wall. Buckets of colorful paint sat beside unopened boxes of brushes, sketchbooks, and easels. Ethan moved through the room wearing faded jeans instead of his usual tailored suit jacket. He rolled up his sleeves and carefully adjusted framed paintings hanging along one hallway. My heart skipped when I recognized them immediately. Every painting decorating those walls belonged to me. Landscapes I had finished years earlier. Watercolor flowers I had given away. Small sketches I had forgotten existed. Somehow Ethan had quietly collected nearly everything I had ever painted. I pressed closer to the glass, trying to understand why. Then I noticed something even stranger. Above every doorway hung a polished wooden plaque with a different name painted in elegant lettering. Sunshine Room, Dream Studio, Hope Gallery, Little Explorers. None of it made sense. As Ethan continued working, two construction workers approached carrying lumber and measuring tools. One of them smiled and asked, "Do you want the final room finished before the anniversary next week?" Ethan glanced toward the hallway and answered quietly enough that I could barely hear him. "It has to be perfect. She has waited her whole life without even knowing it." The workers nodded before disappearing into another room. My breathing became shallow. Anniversary. They were talking about our wedding anniversary only 8 days away. Was this entire place connected to me? Before I could process that thought, a delivery truck backed slowly toward the loading entrance. Several volunteers stepped out carrying large boxes labeled children's books, educational games, and craft materials. Ethan greeted every person warmly, helping unload supplies while checking items against a clipboard. One young volunteer laughed and asked, "Does your wife know what you have been building all these years?" Ethan smiled with quiet affection before shaking his head. "Not yet. She deserves to see it finished first." His answer should have brought comfort, yet it somehow created even more confusion. If this place was for me, why hide it beneath layers of locked doors and unanswered questions? Why build a secret room beneath our house that connected to all of this? As the afternoon shadows stretched across the empty parking lot, Ethan walked toward a heavy steel door at the back of the warehouse. He reached into his pocket, removed the familiar silver key, unlocked the door, and disappeared inside. Seconds later, the door closed once again, leaving me alone with 1,000 unanswered questions and the growing certainty that whatever waited behind that final locked entrance was the true secret Ethan had protected for 3 long years. I remained inside my car until Ethan finally drove away from the warehouse just before sunset. My mind replayed everything I had witnessed over and over again. The paintings, the children's supplies, the volunteers, the unfinished rooms. Nothing resembled the secret family or hidden life I had feared only days before. Instead, every answer seemed to create 2 new questions. If the warehouse was meant to surprise me, why hide an identical locked room beneath our own house? Why did the silver key open both places? And what could possibly be hidden behind the final steel door that even the volunteers never entered? During the drive home, I barely noticed the familiar streets of Chicago passing outside my window. I felt trapped between relief and suspicion. Ethan had clearly not been living a second life with another woman, but he had unquestionably been living another life without me. That realization hurt in a completely different way. When I arrived home, the house felt strangely unfamiliar. Every room now carried the weight of things I did not know. I wandered into my art studio and looked around at the paintings still hanging on the walls. Several empty spaces suddenly caught my attention. I had always assumed Ethan had loaned those pieces to charity auctions or corporate events over the years. Now I realized he had quietly taken them for another purpose. I ran my fingers across the empty hooks and wondered how many times he had stood here choosing one painting after another while I remained completely unaware. That evening, Ethan returned home carrying fresh groceries and smiling exactly as he always did. He asked about my day, complimented a new watercolor resting on the easel, and suggested we order dinner from our favorite Italian restaurant. I answered every question with a smile that felt increasingly difficult to maintain. Across the dinner table, he spoke enthusiastically about upcoming meetings, employee projects, and our anniversary plans, carefully avoiding any mention of the warehouse or the hidden room beneath our home. More than once, I almost interrupted him with the truth. I wanted to ask why he had collected my artwork. I wanted to know what waited behind the steel door. Most of all, I wanted to understand why the man who had always encouraged complete honesty now carried a secret larger than anything we had ever faced together. Instead, I remained silent, studying every expression on his face. There was no guilt, no nervousness, only quiet excitement that seemed to grow stronger with each passing day. Late that night, after Ethan had fallen asleep, I quietly slipped out of bed once again. The basement waited in complete darkness. I moved carefully toward the hidden door, carrying only a flashlight and the determination to learn something for myself. Kneeling beside the old lock, I noticed something I had overlooked before. Along the edge of the wooden frame was a tiny brass plate fastened with 2 small screws. Years of paint had almost hidden the delicate engraving. I brushed away the dust with my fingertips until several faint letters became visible. They read simply, Phase 1. My pulse quickened immediately. Phase 1. If this hidden room was only the first phase, then the warehouse was probably another. The realization connected everything in an instant. Ethan was not protecting one secret. He was protecting an entire plan that had been unfolding piece by piece for 3 years. I slowly stood and looked around the silent basement. Somewhere inside this house, somewhere inside that warehouse, and somewhere behind the final locked door rested the last piece of a puzzle that now seemed far bigger than either of us. For the first time since discovering the silver key, I stopped believing I was searching for evidence against my husband. I realized I was searching for the truth about the dream he had been quietly building while asking me, every single day, to trust him just a little longer. 3 days before our wedding anniversary, Ethan came home earlier than usual with an excitement he could barely hide. He found me in the art studio adding the final touches to a lakeside painting and wrapped his arms gently around my shoulders. "Keep next Saturday completely free," he said with an easy smile. "No gallery events, no lunch with Hannah, no new commissions. I have planned something that I have waited a very long time to show you." My heart tightened. I searched his eyes for some hint that he knew I had uncovered pieces of his secret, but his expression remained filled only with anticipation. I smiled and agreed, though the growing weight of everything I had discovered made the promise feel heavier than he could possibly imagine. The following morning, Ethan left before sunrise for another meeting. Instead of following him, I stayed home, determined to understand the hidden room beneath our house. I stood before the narrow gray door once again, tracing the engraved words on the brass plate with my fingertips. Phase 1. The simple phrase echoed through my thoughts. I stepped back and slowly examined the surrounding shelves instead of the lock itself. For the first time, I noticed that the arrangement of old moving boxes seemed unusually deliberate. They were stacked with careful precision rather than ordinary storage. One by one, I carefully moved several boxes aside. Behind them, the wall continued farther than I had expected, revealing a small built-in cabinet I had never seen before. It was unlocked. Inside rested dozens of sketchbooks, each labeled with a different year in Ethan's handwriting. My pulse quickened as I carefully opened the oldest one. Every page contained architectural drawings, handwritten notes, floor plans, and photographs clipped from magazines. The first page carried a single sentence written in blue ink. A place where Claire's kindness can live forever. I stood perfectly still. Turning another page, I discovered early sketches of the warehouse long before any renovations had begun. Ethan had drawn classrooms filled with easels, reading corners covered with colorful cushions, bright studios flooded with sunlight, and walls displaying children's artwork beside my own paintings. Every room had been revised dozens of times with careful notes written in the margins. Better lighting for painting, wider hallways for wheelchairs, larger windows for natural sunlight, quiet music room, family lounge, creative therapy garden. The deeper I read, the more I realized this had never been an impulsive project. It had consumed years of planning. Tucked inside the final sketchbook was an envelope addressed simply to my future partner. My hands trembled as I unfolded the letter. It had been written nearly 3 years earlier, only weeks after our wedding. Ethan described a conversation we had shared during a visit to a children's hospital, when I had quietly said that every child fighting a difficult illness deserved a place where they could forget fear and simply create something beautiful. He wrote that he had never forgotten those words and had decided that very night to build such a place in secret, hoping to place the silver key into my hand on our 3rd anniversary and tell me it belonged to me. Tears blurred the handwriting before I reached the final paragraph. If this dream is ever completed, it will not be because I built it. It will exist because Claire taught me that kindness can become architecture when someone loves another person enough to build it. I lowered the letter slowly, overwhelmed by emotions I could no longer separate. Every unanswered question suddenly carried a different meaning. Yet one mystery remained. If the sketchbooks explained the warehouse and the hidden room beneath our house, what waited behind the final steel door that Ethan continued protecting with the same old silver key? I folded the letter carefully, returned it to the envelope, and realized that the greatest truth still remained locked, waiting for the anniversary that was now only days away. Our anniversary arrived beneath a clear autumn sky, and Ethan seemed happier than I had seen him in years. He insisted we leave the house early, asking me to wear something comfortable instead of the elegant dress I had expected for a romantic celebration. As we drove through downtown Chicago, he reached across the center console and gently held my hand. Neither of us spoke very much. I carried the memory of the sketchbooks and the unopened questions they had left behind, while Ethan smiled with the quiet confidence of someone finally approaching the finish line after a very long journey. Nearly an hour later, we turned into the same industrial neighborhood I had secretly visited days before. The old warehouse no longer looked forgotten. Fresh landscaping surrounded the entrance. New glass doors reflected the morning sunlight. Colorful murals decorated the brick walls, transforming the once abandoned building into something full of warmth and hope. Several volunteers waited outside, smiling as our car approached, but no one revealed what would happen next. Ethan stepped out first and walked around to open my door. Then, without saying a word, he reached into the inside pocket of his blazer and removed the familiar silver key. He placed it gently into my palm. "It has always belonged to you," he whispered. My eyes filled with tears before I could answer. His fingers closed softly around mine. "Come with me." Together we walked through the main entrance where every hallway I had seen through the window was now complete. Sunlight poured through tall windows onto polished wooden floors. Every room overflowed with color, art supplies, books, musical instruments, and handmade furniture. My paintings hung throughout the building exactly where I had imagined children would see them. Laughter echoed from distant classrooms where volunteers prepared for the first group of young visitors arriving the following week. Ethan guided me through each space, explaining how artists, teachers, therapists, and volunteers would work together to create a place where children facing long medical treatments could paint, read, build, and dream without thinking about hospitals for a little while. Every detail reflected conversations we had shared over the years, even small ideas I barely remembered mentioning. Finally, we reached the heavy steel door at the end of the hallway. Ethan looked at me with gentle anticipation. "This is the only room I never finished alone," he said quietly. "I could not." He nodded toward the silver key resting in my hand. "Would you open it?" My fingers trembled as I slid the key into the lock. The mechanism turned smoothly with a familiar click I had heard so many times from a distance. Slowly, I pushed the door open. Warm morning light flooded into a breathtaking studio unlike anything I had ever imagined. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked a peaceful garden filled with flowering trees. Easels stood ready beside shelves of fresh paints and blank canvases. Along one wall stretched hundreds of framed drawings created by children from hospitals across the country, each one accompanied by a handwritten story of hope. At the center of the room stood a simple wooden plaque engraved with elegant lettering. Claire Brooks Creative Studio. I covered my mouth as tears streamed freely down my face. Ethan stepped beside me and quietly said, "This room has always been waiting for its first teacher. I built the walls, but only you can fill them with life." In that unforgettable moment, every locked door, every unanswered question, every silent promise, and every year of patient secrecy finally came together, revealing that the greatest surprise had never been hidden to keep me away. It had been protected until the day it was complete enough to welcome me home. For several long moments I could not speak. I simply stood inside the beautiful studio while tears quietly traced down my face, overwhelmed by the realization that every unanswered question had led me to this place. Ethan never interrupted my silence. He understood that some gifts needed time before words could reach them. Finally, I turned toward him and wrapped my arms around him with all the strength I had. "I am so sorry," I whispered through trembling breaths. "I doubted you. I thought you were hiding something from me because you no longer trusted me." Ethan gently rested his forehead against mine and smiled with the same warmth that had carried us through every season of our marriage. "I was hiding something," he answered softly, "but never because I stopped trusting you. I only wanted the dream to be worthy of you before you saw it." We remained there quietly until cheerful voices echoed from the front entrance. The first group of invited families had arrived for a private preview before the official opening the following week. Children of different ages stepped carefully inside, some walking beside their parents, others using wheelchairs or moving slowly with quiet determination. Their eyes immediately filled with wonder as they noticed the bright colors, shelves of books, musical instruments, and endless rows of fresh art supplies waiting just for them. Without thinking, I instinctively moved toward a young girl sitting quietly near the doorway, holding a blank sketchbook against her chest. She smiled shyly as I knelt beside her. "Do you like to draw?" I asked gently. She nodded. "I like drawing places I want to visit someday." I picked up a box of colored pencils and placed it beside her. "Then today seems like the perfect day to begin another journey." Within minutes, the studio filled with quiet laughter and conversation. Easels became busy with colorful paintings. Parents who had arrived carrying visible worry slowly relaxed as they watched their children become completely absorbed in creativity instead of medical appointments or difficult routines. Ethan stood across the room speaking with volunteers, but every few moments our eyes met. Neither of us needed words anymore. Everything we had struggled to understand had already been answered by the joy unfolding around us. Later that afternoon, after the families had returned home, we walked together through the peaceful garden behind the building. Autumn leaves drifted gently across the stone pathway, while sunlight reflected through the glass walls of the studio. I reached into my pocket and removed the silver key. "I cannot keep this," I said quietly. "It belongs here now." Ethan smiled and shook his head. It belongs wherever you decide it belongs. The building may have started as my promise, but from today forward it is our purpose. I looked back toward the studio where volunteers continued arranging supplies for opening day. Suddenly I understood why he had never allowed me to see any of it before now. If I had discovered the project halfway through construction, I would have immediately tried to help finish it. I would have worried about costs, schedules, and every small detail. Instead, Ethan had given me something much greater. He had protected my ability to experience hope without limits, allowing me to walk into a completed dream instead of an unfinished project. As the afternoon faded into evening, we locked the front entrance together for the very first time. I carefully turned the old silver key before placing it back into Ethan's hand. He looked at it for a moment, then gently closed my fingers around it again. "No," he said with a quiet smile. "From this day forward, every door it opens belongs to you as much as it belongs to me." 1 year later, the building that had once been an abandoned warehouse had become one of the brightest places in the city. Every weekday morning its hallways filled with laughter, colorful backpacks, paint-stained aprons, and families who arrived carrying hope instead of fear. The studio that Ethan had named after me no longer belonged to me alone. It belonged to every child who walked through its doors believing that imagination could still be stronger than uncertainty. Some painted oceans they hoped to see someday. Others built tiny cities from recycled materials or filled sketchbooks with dreams too big to fit inside ordinary conversations. Every finished drawing covered the walls with reminders that courage often arrived in the smallest hands. My own paintings remained throughout the building, but they no longer felt like decorations. They had become quiet companions to hundreds of new masterpieces created by children whose creativity inspired me every single day. Ethan continued leading Carter Technologies with the same dedication as always, yet every Friday afternoon he left the office early and came directly to the center. The expensive business suit usually disappeared within minutes, replaced by comfortable jeans and a simple blue shirt already marked with tiny spots of dried paint from previous weekends. The children loved seeing him arrive because they knew he never acted like a wealthy executive. To them he was simply Mr. Ethan, the man who could build bookshelves, repair easels, and somehow lose every friendly board game with dramatic enthusiasm that always made everyone laugh. Watching him kneel beside a child to admire a watercolor sunset or celebrate a carefully painted flower reminded me that true success had never been measured by company profits or magazine covers. It was measured by the lives quietly changed when nobody expected recognition. One peaceful afternoon after the center closed, Ethan invited me back to the small hidden room beneath our home where this extraordinary journey had secretly begun. The shelves that once concealed the narrow gray door had been removed, allowing warm light to fill the space naturally. Inside, the sketchbooks remained exactly where I had first discovered them, but now one additional volume rested beside the others. The cover simply read Year 4. Curious, I opened it. Instead of architectural drawings, every page contained photographs of smiling children, handwritten thank you notes from families, colorful fingerprints, and tiny sketches given to us during the past year. Ethan had quietly continued documenting the dream, not as a construction project anymore, but as a living story that would never truly be finished. At the very last page, he had written only one sentence. "The most beautiful doors are the ones people continue opening for others." I closed the book slowly as tears once again filled my eyes, though this time they came only from gratitude. Before leaving the room, we placed the old silver key inside a simple glass display case, mounted beside the entrance. A small engraved plaque rested beneath it. It read, "The first key." Every child who someday asked about it would hear the same story. Not about hidden rooms or mysterious secrets, but about a promise built with patience, protected with love, and shared when the time was finally right. As Ethan reached for my hand and we walked upstairs together, sunlight poured through the windows overlooking Lake Michigan, filling our home with quiet warmth. I realized that the greatest gift my husband had ever given me was never the building, the studio, or even the key itself. It was the gentle reminder that love does not always reveal itself immediately. Sometimes it works quietly behind closed doors, asking only for enough faith to wait until everything is ready to bloom.